You are listening to Arcane Carolinas, an exploration of the Carolinas' folklore, legends, myths, and modern weird. Each episode, we examine the historical context of our topic and aim to preserve some of the stories that help make this part of the world such a fascinating place.
Hey y'all, Michael here. Two quick things about upcoming stuff. First, I'll be reading from my next book, an Appalachian cosmic horror novel called Children of Solitude, at Flyleaf Books in Chapel Hill, North Carolina at 6 p.m. on Thursday, January 9th. This is going to be a group reading by members of the North Carolina chapter of Horror Writers Association, so there'll be lots of great stories to hear. I'll also have some AC swag, and the store will be selling copies of Perishables, the first of my North Carolina vampire novels, as well as my most recent novel, Servant Sovereign, which, if you recall our Arcane Destinations episode about San Francisco, stars Emperor Norton in a time travel adventure. I'll link to information about those books and to the event itself in the show notes and on Facebook and Blue Sky. That's another thing. We've got a Blue Sky account. We just hardly ever use it. I, as myself, am super active on Blue Sky, but we're going to try to use the Arcane Carolinas account a little more too. So if you're on Blue Sky, find us there. I'll put a link to that in the show notes also. And a little farther out, I'll be selling books and giving away Arcane Carolina swag by the fistful at the Nevermore Film Festival in Durham, North Carolina in February. And Charlie and I will be recording more episodes than you would believe if I told you, as guests of RetCon 2025, also in Durham, North Carolina, at the end of February and beginning of March. There will be links to those in the show notes as well. We also have events planned in March and April and May, but I don't want to overwhelm you with info. Just keep an eye on the show notes on these intros and on Facebook and Blue Sky, and we'll make sure you hear about them in advance. Thanks for listening, and on with the show.
Hello and welcome back to Arcane Carolinas. This is a 2-for-1 that we didn't intend to do. We just talked about drones for 30 minutes.
Yeah, but hey, it's in the moment.
Yeah. So today's episode, I should rewind. Hi, I'm your co-host, Charlie Musho.
I'm your other co-host and multi-award winning novelist, Michael G. Williams.
And today we are taking a bite into a big legend out of North Carolina, one that we've been aware of since the start of the show, and that is Lydia's Bridge.
Indeed. If I remember correctly, this is one that people have literally from day one been asking us to talk about.
Yes, that is accurate. Lydia's Bridge is one of the big stories, and we'll get into why. But there's been a lot of press around it as well for several years. Some researchers have a theory, and we'll get to that. And then Carolina Haints worked with that nonprofit that we looked into about folklore signs. They're like non-state issued historical markers. Yeah. Which is funny because when we started back in 2020, do you remember I wrote a letter to the state, State Highway Administration, and was like, I would like to get a historical marker put on the Devil's Footprints in Bath, North Carolina. And they were like, that's great. We don't do that, but these people do. And I was like, not right now. But now they're starting to pop up in the state thanks to the work of Carolina Haints, which is good on them.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. Anything that helps spread an awareness of these sorts of stories, I think is good.
Yeah. So we wanted to let that breathe a little bit and not jump right on that. But the time has come. Lydia's Bridge is located in Jamestown. I'm just jumping right in.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So Lydia's Bridge is in Jamestown, North Carolina, within Guilford County. And we have talked about Guilford County in prior episodes. So I'm going to focus today instead on Jamestown proper. Mm-hmm. The Kiowa people, and if I pronounce that wrong, just let me know. The Kiowa people were the initial inhabitants, but had moved south and been absorbed into the Catawba by 1760. So an empty spot when initial settlers arrived. They were Quakers coming south from Pennsylvania.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. In 1781, during the Revolutionary War, British General Cornwallis's army camped near the settlement and commandeered provisions from local farms and mills.
Yeah.
And that was prior to his engagement with Nathaniel Greene's troops at New Garden in modern-day Greensboro, which is a very short drive. And I will actually say I went out to Lydia's Bridge to take some pictures and photos, and I'll post those on Instagram and Facebook. But I went to McCool's Public House in Greensboro and had a lovely time. So if you're in Greensboro, check that spot out. The food is very, very good.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah. By 1800, Jamestown had ballooned to a whopping 150 people.
A real hopping joint.
Yeah. Weird. It did have its own post office.
Oh, that's not surprising, actually. Oftentimes, basically, the most populated place for a ways would get a post office, even if that place did not have many people in it.
150.
Yeah.
They also had, by 1800, their own Freemason lodge. So there were people of influence. And around that time is when gold was discovered near Jamestown and a couple of mines popped up.
Yeah.
So Jamestown was happening. Very small, but happening. In addition to farming and agricultural industries, it was also home to a gun factory, which manufactured what is described as a sturdy and accurate muzzle-loading gun known as the Jamestown rifle.
Oh, interesting. Never heard of it.
I had never heard of it either, but you can still get them. I went and looked it up. They're not making them there, but they were that sturdy. Yeah, no, they're not still making muskets in Jamestown.
I was like, my goodness, that is dedication to the bit.
I'm sure somebody somewhere is still making muskets in Jamestown, but
I'm sure.
But the Jamestown rifle was a mainstay of Jamestown's industry through the latter half of the 19th century and is today a highly prized collectible amongst antique firearm collectors. Hey, we know somebody that had a musket. Remember that? And he was like, how do I sell this? And I was like, dude, I don't know.
It rings some bells. I think I remember who that was.
Yeah. Dave was like, check out this awesome musket I have. I was like, dude, that's awesome. He's like, I want to sell it. And I was like, I'll give you $100. And he was like, no, I want more than that. And I was like, I have no idea how to sell that.
Yeah. Have fun at the pawn shop.
Yeah. So during the Civil War, Jamestown Quakers were, we've talked about this a lot in the Purgatory Mountain episode, were either forced to pay heavy taxes to be exempt from the war effort or conscripted into non-combat roles of working in mines and leatherworking and stuff like that.
All the fun stuff that kills you much more slowly.
Right.
Yeah.
Confederate President Jefferson Davis and his crew passed through Jamestown while retreating after the Civil War ended. Prior to the war and during the war, Jamestown was known as a stop along the Underground Railroad. And according to local historical records, Quaker homes in this area had a trapdoor leading to the basement to help enslaved people escape. And I'd be very curious if there's any historic homes that have been preserved where you could still find one. I think that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, that'd be very, very cool.
I could not find any online. That doesn't mean they're not there.
Yeah.
The railroad arrived in 1856 and bisects Jamestown and is still operational, and that's going to be a part of our story. So on to the 20th century. It wasn't until April 1947 that the North Carolina General Assembly granted Jamestown incorporation. Several months after that, they set up municipal water and sewer. In the 50s, they had really ballooned up, and they had 750 people.
Wow.
And the town boasted improvements such as streetlights and a fire department.
Those things are important.
I just feel like, remember the old Sim City? How like the one you'd have like a little block and it would just like not develop for some reason. You're like, why isn't this block growing? That's what this feels like.
I gotta say, they're doing better than the place where I grew up.
It remains a relatively small town. It's a suburb of Greensboro, but it's produced a number of both professional and Olympic athletes.
Really?
Yeah. And a very famous ghost.
Yes.
Lydia of Lydia's Bridge. So the legend. It is said. Don't you love when it starts like that?
It is said by the person writing this account.
And we're going to get to that. It is said that the spirit of a young woman haunts the underpasses of not one, but two bridges. One is a railroad bridge over East Main Street that has a plaque on it about its restoration in 2009. That's the current road. So the current road is in use and goes under that bridge. The other is a tunnel immediately next to that one where the road used to go. Until recently had been covered in kudzu and just in a general state of disrepair. Kids would still go in there and spray paint, whatever, but it had been covered up before this effort to create a path that walks through it. And they have like a nice little covered awning thing at each mouth of it. And they have the historical marker. You can park and walk right through it. I did. I'll post the video. The abandoned underpasses are where Lydia is supposed to appear. And specifically, the older one is said to have been the scene of a fatal car accident where she died.
Mm-hmm.
So Lydia is said to be seen it is said that the spirit known as Lydia can be seen on rainy or foggy nights as she walks alone or stands beside the road searching for help to get back home. She will flag down a passing motorist for help. There's a bunch of different versions, obviously, the way these things go. Some say she's always wearing white. She's always in white. But she appears solid. She's not a apparition. She has corporeal form. If we want to refer back to last year's taxonomy episode.
Yeah, totally.
She'll ask for a ride. She gets in the car. You drive her home. And when you get to the location and turn around to let her out, she's not there.
Mm-hmm.
In some cases, there's a puddle of water. In some cases, there's nothing. This is all tied to the fact that there was a car accident. She was killed. She was coming back from a dance with a young man. No name is given for the young man. And local lore states that this goes back to the 1920s.
Mm-hmm.
North Carolina folklorist Nancy Roberts.
Oh, God. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Included the account of an eerie sighting of a woman near the bridge in her 1959 classic, An Illustrated Guide to Ghosts and Mysterious Occurrences in the Old North State.
Mm-hmm.
She said a man by the name of Burke Hardison told her of his encounter with a young woman as he traveled home to High Point on a rainy and foggy night while he was a student at NC State. He said this occurred in 1924. Hardison claimed to see a girl dressed in a white gown. She signaled for him to stop and asked him to help her get to High Point. He drove her home, and when he went to get out of the car, she had vanished into thin air. He knocked on the door of the house and asked if the girl was there, only to learn from her mother that she had been killed in a car accident at a nearby overpass the year before.
It's not an unfamiliar format for the story.
Many people are saying, Michael, have claimed to see the girl in white alongside the road. And some have stopped to help. Again, she'll vanish when they stop, or she'll get in, and then it'll just be a rainy, wet mark in the outline of a person in the back seat, that kind of thing. So Lydia, easily nicer than Large Marge, other phantom road person. But is it any closer to reality? I'm going to give it the Arcane Carolinas treatment here. I'm going to where we start digging, and there is a twist that I think you're going to like.
Okay. Because I got to say, I'm coming into this pretty skeptical.
We're going to address all the things.
Okay.
So in 2000, the story was written up in the North Carolina Folklore Journal with details about the history of the publication of the myth and Nancy Roberts, variations on the tale, examples of how different takes on its retelling are notable, and we'll get into all the different versions of the vanishing hitchhiker legend. In more recent times, two local researchers had really jumped into Lydia was what they wanted to hang their hat on. One of them is deceased at this point, Michael Renegar. He recently passed away, and his colleague Amy Career. They came upon an article in the Greensboro Patriot from June 21st, 1920. So they did what we do. They just went digging. So they did the work for me. And they found a report. So cheers. They found a report of a young woman named Annie Jackson who had been killed on the High Point Road, is what the article describes. 3 miles from High Point and relatively close to the location of the bridges.
I am very surprised that there is any, even shred of connection to something that actually happened. But keep going.
The driver lost control of the vehicle. Annie was thrown out of the car. The article uses the description that the road was wet and the car turned turtle.
Oh, that's not good.
No, they died. They really locked into this. And Michael Renegar, he really leaned into this is the source when he spoke to someone genealogically tied to Annie.
No way.
Yeah. This is a quote. Michael David Mitchell says that when he was growing up, his daddy told them they were related to Lydia. Mr. Mitchell is the grandchild of Annie's sister, Dora. He just couldn't believe that somebody else knew the story and was looking for information.
That I am literally stunned silent.
Yeah. Pretty cool. Name is not Lydia. Name is Annie.
Whatever. Yeah, that part doesn't matter to me at all.
Some accounts are like her middle initial was L, and that could have stood for Lydia. And I'm like, yeah, maybe. I don't know.
The fact that there is any real person here who could have been Lydia is shocking to me.
So here's the real twist that I think you're going to be like, oh, interesting, because it ties into so many other stories that we've talked about. So Nancy Roberts quoted somebody named Burke Hardison.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Renegar and Greer said that name was a pseudonym and made up, that they couldn't find any records. Now, I don't know what resources they had available. I was able to find 2 B. Hardisons that lived at the same time as Nancy.
Okay.
So I don't necessarily think it was completely made up. I think she gave somebody the Wedby treatment, like the Cora tree, and used a friend's name in there.
Yeah. We have talked in the past with other stories where Nancy Roberts would give very specific details about the identity of somebody, and we would never be able to find that person in the record. And at the time said, maybe she changed their name. Maybe they asked to have a different name used. Maybe there are so many explanations there.
Renegar went on record saying that he believes the name was just made up. But I was able to find people that could be Burke Hardison.
Mm-hmm.
One lived on the eastern part of the state. He lived in Ocracoke, which made me think of Wedby and all those people talked.
Yeah, they all knew each other.
They all knew each other. They were all connected. I don't think that one is an accident. There is another one that I couldn't find a location for the death, but they are in the Social Security Death Index and died in the 90s. But yeah, so interesting. That was the thing for me that was more shocking, was that I found an actual person to tie to a Nancy Roberts.
That is radically surprising to me. That is shocking. Yeah.
Like a car accident on a windy road. Okay, whatever. I can't believe that I somewhat validated anything from Nancy Roberts' tale. We might catch some hate on that. I know people like Nancy Roberts.
I love Nancy Roberts. You have to go into a Nancy Roberts book knowing that she was interested in being a storyteller more than she was interested in being a historian.
Yes.
And that's, as long as you draw that distinction, then I have no arguments with anything she did.
There you go. You are so much kinder than me.
I had to do some work to get there.
Yeah. I did an interview recently and was asked some questions where I just shook my head. First off, it was 2:00 in the morning because it was a West Coast thing. Mm-hmm. And I just had to shake my head and look down. I was like, no, that's a terrible question. No. And the person doing the interview was like, what's so bad about belief? I'm like, if you believe anything, you'll fall for anything, or whatever the quote is. You can't just take it all as fact, man. He's like, why not? I'm like, I don't know, but I can't. So
because life requires critical thinking.
Right.
Survival requires critical thinking.
That's why I need you on these things, because I'm just there. I don't know. That's stupid. It's late and I'm tired. Next.
So for many years, there was a real problem in Durham with people, this will connect, I promise, with people waiting in traffic, deciding to go ahead and wait for the stop sign or the red light or whatever on the railroad tracks. And it took a pretty high profile tragedy in the last 10 or 15 years for everybody to get the sense of, oh, maybe that's a really dumb thing to do. Literally yesterday or the day before, I don't remember. I was driving. I had to cross railroad tracks. There was traffic ahead of me. I stopped before the railroad tracks so that I would not be sitting on the railroad tracks because survival takes a little bit of critical thinking. And I feel like that is all the answer somebody needs for why not just believe everything. A, because everything is self-contradictory, and that is a pathway to madness. And B, that will lead to some really dumb choices.
Yeah, I wish I had that articulate of a response, but it was late and I was tired, and all I said was like, no, move on.
Oh, if somebody had asked me at 2:00 in the morning, I also would have said, no, that's a stupid question. Next. First, I would have said, what are you doing in my house waking me up? But
also, no. The vanishing hitchhiker trope, right? I wanted to explore a little bit about that. I've mentioned a book from, I think it's from the 70s, either late 70s or early 80s. It's a collection of folklore. I'm sorry, it's a collection of urban legends.
Yeah. I have a copy also.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, The Vanishing Hitchhiker and Other Tales. I wanted to go earlier than that, right? Because that was obviously collated from sources. I wanted to go a little bit earlier. So I found an earlier study on the story of vanishing hitchhikers as a trope in folklore by American folklorists Richard Beardsley and Rosalie Hankey from 1943. That's when they were done, but the study actually ran from 42 to 43, which is an interesting time with what was going on in the world. We're going to talk about vanishing hitchhikers. It seems probably a nice distraction. So they collected as many accounts as they could and analyzed and categorized them. They got 79 written accounts of encounters with vanishing hitchhikers drawn from all across the continental United States. They found, and I quote, 4 distinctly different versions, distinguishable because of obvious differences in development and essence. They are described as A, stories where the hitchhiker gives an address through which the motorist learns he or she has just given a lift to a ghost. 49 of the samples fell into this category, with responses from 16 different states. B, stories where the hitchhiker is an old woman who prophesizes coming events. Subsequent inquiries will also reveal her to be deceased.
Interesting.
9 samples fit this description, with 8 of the 9 coming specifically from the vicinity of the Chicago metro area. They felt that this indicated a local origin, which they dated back to 1933.
I love it.
C, stories where a girl is met at some place of entertainment, not on the side of the road. A social event where she leaves some sort of physical token, like scarf or shawl or something, and it's found left on her grave, corroborating both the experience and the identity of the ghost.
Ooh, I like that.
But the uniformity among separate accounts on that variant led Beardsley and Hankey to doubt its folkloric authenticity. And then I like this category. D, stories where the hitchhiker is later identified as a local divinity.
Okay.
They were particularly interested to note that in one instance out of New York, 1941, a vanishing hitchhiker was subsequently identified as the late Mother Cabrini, founder of the local Sacred Heart Orphanage.
Wow. I find it fascinating that somebody would try to enfold this legend in religion.
They viewed that as a case of version B squished into version D.
Yeah, totally.
They do believe that version A is the closest to the original form of the story of the vanishing hitchhiker because it contains all the essential elements of the legend, while B and D were localized variations, with C, girl met at a place of entertainment, was supposed to have started life as a separate ghost story, which at some stage became conflated with the original vanishing hitchhiker story, version A. In the majority of cases, the hitchhiker is female and the lift giver male. The samples contain 47 young female apparitions, 14 old lady apparitions, and 14 more of an indeterminate sort.
Interesting.
Here is where it gets really wild. We're going to leave the United States here for a minute. What is believed to be one of the earliest vanishing hitchhiker tales is the story of a priest and two farmers on their way home from, I might pronounce some of this wrong. There's a lot of Swedish. I might go into the Muppet Swedish Chef. I don't know.
Okay, keep going.
So they're on the road from the Candlemas market in Östergötland, Sweden. And they happen upon a maid who asks to tag along with them on the travel. And the group stops off at an inn for a bite to eat. The maid goes for a jug of beer. And the first time the innkeeper fetches the jug of beer, it's filled with malt. What's this? That's wrong. So they get another one. The second time, it's acorns. The third time, the jug is filled with blood.
Oh.
The maid explains to the horrified group that this year will yield much grain and fruit, but it will also bring war and pestilence, and then disappears.
Ooh.
This story is found in a old manuscript that's over 400 years. I'm going to butcher this. The taken either redeer the same for go to Lierski's Boston's dead.
Okay.
Loosely translated as about the signs and wonders that preceded the liturgical event, authored by somebody named, oh man, there's so many umlauts. We'll go with the last name. Someone named Clint, a priest in the diocese of Linköping, Sweden. Linköping. He was also a collector of omens. There's more research that precedes that famous book. Author Ernest W. Bauman's Type and Motif Index of the Folk Tales of England and North America, published in 1966, delineates the basic vanishing hitchhiker as follows. Ghost of young woman asks for a ride in automobile, disappears from closed car without the driver's knowledge. This is after she is given an address to which she desires to be taken. The driver asks the person at the address about the rider, finds out she's been dead for some time. That's it.
Yeah.
Variations include some item being left behind, such as a scarf.
It's so fascinating to me that original version involves a Candlemas market and a maiden telling them that the harvest will be good.
Mm-hmm.
Candlemas is the celebration of the presentation in Christian liturgical tradition. It's the presentation of the infant Christ at the temple by Jesus and Mary, which is an event that in the Bible version of it was occasioned by some prophecy. But it is celebrated on the old Roman feast day of Lupercalia, which is also a modern neo-pagan festival day or holiday. And Lupercalia was specifically a fertility festival about having a good outcome to the planting season ahead.
Interesting.
Yeah. So there's a lot of ways in which this takes elements of the Mad Lib version of both of those. It pulls together a bunch of nouns and adjectives from both of those and puts them in the big lotto ball spinny thing and sees what comes out. Like remixes all of it together.
Remix.
Yeah. Yes, this is the EDM dance remix version of Lupercalia and Candlemas. I find it fascinating that so many elements of that have survived into it, including it eventually being like remixed back into a different version of Christian belief.
On that note, would you like it? Because this all ties into what I was going to share. So Bauman's classification system, he has a like Dewey Decimal System thing going on. But like, I'll just go with as simple as I can put it. I'm not going to go E332.3.3.1.8. Like, I'm not going to do that.
Right.
So subcategories, I'll just list them in order 1 through whatever. 1, vanishing hitchhikers who reappear on anniversaries.
Okay.
2, vanishing hitchhikers who leave items in vehicles unless the item is a pool of water, in which case it is 3.
Okay.
Yeah. 4, It's an account for sinister old ladies who prophesy disasters.
Okay.
Sounds like a lot of people I've known. 5, contains accounts of phantoms who are apparently sufficiently solid enough to engage in activities such as eating or drinking during their journey.
Mm-hmm.
So that goes back to the Swedish one, the Swedish one. So I gotta stop doing that. 6, for phantom parents who want to be taken to the sickbed of a ill dying child.
Oh.
7 is great. Hitchhikers, they just want to ride home.
Who can blame them?
8, actually, there's a whole thing here. There's a category reserved exclusively for vanishing nuns, which is described as surprisingly common as a variant, some of whom foretell the future. But here it blends into a religious encounter, turns into what he describes as the last classification, which I touched on earlier, which is an encounter with divinity, who take to the road as hitchhikers. And then in his classification system, he considers the legend of St. Christopher to be one of these, and the story of Philip the Evangelist being transported by God after encountering the Ethiopian on the road in the book of Acts.
And it also ties into angels unaware kind of stuff from Christianity and all kinds of things.
So there's just so much here. So is the ghost of Lydia's Bridge really based on a documented event, or was it a piece of lore applied to an unrelated accident? I'm going to leave that up to the listener. I know people have big feelings on Lydia's Bridge. I'm going to go with the latter.
I think my take on it is going to be yes. I was very surprised to hear that there was an actual accident involving somebody in kind of the right place and kind of the right time. So there is, for my moldery kind of take on things, there's plenty there to say, okay, there is a factual event that could very easily lead to a real haunting. And this is a category of story that has existed for a very long time. There were phantom hitchhiker, phantom passenger stories from wagon road days, from 17th century people driving carts in rural areas in the Carolinas. There's a story that we have in the big list of ideas that I've never been able to do any verification of, so I've never brought it up as one to talk about a guy who claimed that his great-great-uncle's best friend's dog's original owner had operated a farm and driven a cart around on that farm. And every night on his way back to the house, a phantom passenger would step onto the back of the cart at one part of the farm and then step off of the cart at another part of the farm. And he'd be able to feel the weight shifting. But as long as he did not look back, then it would not disappear. So this kind of stuff, it floats around a lot. I think there are a lot of cautionary tales that get wrapped up in these. I think that there's a lot that these are a cipher for in terms of ways to encode important information to pass on to kids. But I also think, I'll be damned, there was an actual car accident at the right time in the right place.
Or, as always, maybe it's a materialized thought form created through the intense concentration of collective energy applied to the lore and subject.
Which also I'd be very into. Yeah. As a kid, we had a phantom hitchhiker story growing up where I grew up about Tunnel Road in Asheville. Every place has this story.
Tally Johnson shared one with us at one point. I'm sure it's in some live episode that he's on, because I remember him talking about it. But yeah, that's Lydia. Some people swear she's a genuine haunting. Some people say it's all bunk. I think personally, for me, it's an old trope that got a local coat of paint on it, but I like it. It's a good one. That's part of Jamestown's history and storytelling.
And it's the sort of story that keeps people engaged with this kind of story in general. Mm-hmm. And for that, I think it is totally of value regardless.
Yeah. Well, thanks for listening. Check out arcanecarolinas.com, where you can click on the merch link and go buy stuff from our store with all your Christmas money.
Transfer your Christmas money to us.
I'll buy a drone. It's going to be a lot of books.
Oh my God. Yeah. It'd take a lot of books for me to buy a drone, but gosh, that'd be fun. At any rate, Thanks for listening. This is a great topic. Thanks for bringing this up. Thanks for doing this research.
Yeah, I'm just happy we got a twofer out of it.
Yeah, totally. All right. Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to Arcane Carolinas. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. For more episodes, behind the scenes information, and links to our social media, check out www.arcanecarolinas.com, where you can also buy the Arcane Carolinas book.
And if you like award-winning horror and science fiction, check out my books at michaelgwilliamsbooks.com. And if you have story suggestions, comments, or questions, email us at arcanecarolinas@gmail.com. And thanks for listening.